Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Just John Keir here today doing a solo episode, Season 5, Episode 13B. First of all, I wanted to thank my co-host Austin Davidson for doing a terrific job during this pre-draft process, and I really appreciate his contributions, and I want to thank him for bearing with me through this difficult process for me. I've had a lot pop up that's made going through this whole pre-draft analysis process more difficult than it usually has been, and he's been very patient through that, so I want to make sure I give him his due, and he posted a solo episode of his preview of the interior offensive line and also did an extra mosh posh of prospect analysis as well. So he's worked very hard, and I want to acknowledge that before I continue. And secondly, today being the day of the draft, I had some issues coming up with things at my residence that I had to deal with. So I unfortunately had to record this much later than I wanted to. So this is unfortunately going to be a bit of a rushed, if you will, or at least streamlined podcast. I'm going to get in my 4 interior offensive line prospects that I looked at, and then I'm going to do a quick Steelers mock draft. I know that they aren't picking until day 2, so I could technically post that later, but with everything going on, I figured it would just be good to get that out of the way right now. So, as we approach, obviously the NFL draft is tonight, that being Thursday, April 23rd, and it's 3:41 Eastern Time right now. So throughout this whole process, we generally try to go in order by position of what the Steelers need the least to what they need the most. And this year it was kind of a moving target because the Steelers had a big hole at tight end, so that position was previously the last one we were going to look at, but when Eric Ebron was signed, we had to do some reshuffling, and even though this might not necessarily be the top need right now, interior offensive line is one that saw a big hit with losing guys like B.J. Finney to free agency and Ramon Foster to retirement. So even though their losses are offset by the signing of free agent Stefan Wisniewski and possibly Matt Filer moving to left guard, I like to imagine a scenario where the Steelers take an interior offensive lineman that doesn't lock Matt Filer into place, like, oh, he's got to be the starting left guard, or him and Wisniewski have to battle for the left guard spot, or, God forbid, Chukuma Okorafor and Zach Banner aren't good in the preseason. It's like, oh, you have to put Matt Filer in at right tackle now, and then you only have Wisniewski at left guard and nothing behind him. Adding a guard in this draft should be able to help offset that, bolster your depth, and we know that the Steelers' offense over the years, the last 6-7 years, had become a strength of this team. And now we see guys like Marcus Gilbert and Ramon Foster now exiting, and there are questions about the long-term futures for Marquise Pouncey, who's close to retirement, and Alejandro Villanueva, who could be starting to fall off, possibly based on his play last season. There's a lot of moving parts here, so restocking your offensive line, especially with a 38-year-old quarterback, is important. So with that in mind, Austin already covered his 4 offensive linemen. It's time for me to start. So just a quick preview. I took a look at Matt Hennessy, a guy that's been connected to the Steelers, a lineman from Temple. So I'll be talking about him. Justin Herron from Wake Forest, Kyle Murphy from Rhode Island, and Calvin Throckmorton from Oregon. Oregon has 3 offensive linemen that went to the Combine, so I'll be taking a look at one of them. So I'm going to start with the guy that has been connected to the Steelers the most, and that's Matt Hennessy from Temple. At 6'4" and 307 pounds, a redshirt junior, so essentially a senior coming out. Fun fact about him growing up, he grew up with a brother who made it to the NFL, and his brother Thomas Hennessy, who is a long snapper for the Jets, and he became a full-time starter after his redshirt freshman season. He only played in 3 games, started 1, but had a season-ending injury, and he was able to gain a red shirt because of that. So he was never redshirted because of ability. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And he ended up starting, missing just 4 games over his last 3 seasons, and was a 3rd-team All-American last year. The strengths of Hennessy's game, let's get to that. He's athletic enough to be used on the move. He's an excellent technically sound player. He has a lower pad level due to his height. He's not super tall. He has good leverage on his blocks. And he has his hands in a good and ready position. And he delivers a good punch that's usually in a good location. He's also, this is one thing you see a lot with quicker offensive linemen, is on combination blocks, he'll try to jump to the second level before the first level has been completely blocked. That's not the case with him. He is usually pretty good at making sure that the first level's been taken care of, because if you try to jump the gun, you're going to end up with a defensive lineman either on your running back or in the backfield, so that's not good. He's flexible, so he's able to extend himself pretty well, and he's got good balance and pass protection. And a minor plus, one thing that I noticed is that his snaps back to the quarterback were always pretty accurate and pretty quick too. Obviously, we saw that was an issue with Marquise Pouncey last year, and it's something he's had issues with over the course of his career at times. The weaknesses of his game, though, is that he's slightly undersized. At only 6'4" and 307 pounds, he's a little lighter than the typical offensive lineman in the NFL nowadays. But he does have room to add muscle, but it's not there right now. He has shorter arms and his hand size is merely adequate. 2 gapping nose tackles were an issue for him because they were so much bigger. And he also struggled with picking up stunts and twists along the defensive front, and we saw that the Steelers really struggled with that towards the end of this past season. He also showed a tendency to commit too early, when a pass rusher shows a move and will then use it to counter on what the offensive lineman does. He gets baited into that a lot. He also doesn't really offer position flexibility at this point, and he might be limited in terms of scheme because of his size, and he's lacking a little bit of power too because of the whole issues in needing to add more muscle. So when taking all that into consideration, Matt Hennessy, who was an effective player for the Owls for 3+ years, was athletic enough to overcome some pretty big size disadvantages, and that may limit his scheme fit, but if he can add muscle without losing some of that speed, I think he'll be a solid interior offensive lineman, probably a solid starter in the league for at least a handful of seasons, if not more. And even though he's technically sound right now, he can still get more out of his body, and that's pretty encouraging. I could see him as a mid-day 2, possibly to as late as an early day 3 selection. But I definitely wouldn't mind seeing a guy like Hennessy going at 102 to the Steelers with their second pick. But I have seen him going as high as 49 too, so I wouldn't eliminate that from the realm of possibility as well. I saw his games against Boston College in 2018 and at SMU in 2019. Second player I was looking at was Kyle Murphy from Rhode Island at 6'3" and 316 pounds. Brief overview, he was twice named the team captain for Rhode Island, twice named the team captain, and was a first-team all-conference honor for his last 2 seasons on campus. And he started games at left guard, right tackle, center, and left tackle. So I believe only right tackle is the only place where he didn't start. Murphy had some solid position flexibility on the interior of the offensive line. He obviously played 4 of the 5 positions in college, so that's good to see. He was pretty quick off the ball, had good foot quickness, and was always driving them. You like to see that. Good hip flexion, and has pretty good athlete overall for an offensive lineman. And he's experienced in a zone blocking scheme. That's what they ran at Rhode Island. And he was one of those guys that just has a nasty type of mean streak to their game where he's going to drive someone basically into the stands. And I sent a video of one of the games I was watching to Austin where he basically takes the guy in. He takes the guy like 15 yards down the field, just taking the guy for a ride, offering kind of him to offer some nice public transportation there. So that was nice of him to do. And he was also a captain on both at Rhode Island and in high school, so he's a natural leader. And, just one of those guys that's just an effective run blocker overall. Some of the issues with this game, though, is that he's pops up a little too tall out of his stance, which is concerning when you consider that he's a little shorter than the average offensive lineman. And he tends to shoot too high with his hands, so he's not getting as much out of his drive blocks as he should. Also, his punch timing isn't all that great. He's not doing a great job of recognizing twists, and he'll lunge and grab when he's facing a speed rusher instead of a power rusher. And also, the big concern when you're talking about Rhode Island is that you're playing a Division I AA schools, and you're not facing the best competition, similar to Derek Tuska, who I looked at earlier in this process. So all in all, Murphy's a good athlete with some good attributes, played along the entire offensive line. He stood out in college, but his transition to the pros may be a challenge. His strengths generally lie in pass protection, and he is okay at down blocking right now, but he needs to get stronger before he gets better there. His athleticism, while good, is likely to be canceled out by the other top athletes at the NFL level. I see Murphy as a day 3 selection with decent upside as a good backup, but not right now. His tape wasn't overly impressive to me. I wouldn't want to see him going earlier than the middle of the 5th or the early 6th round. I saw his game against Ohio in 2019. Next, I'm taking a look at Justin Herron from Wake Forest. He was a primary starter in 4 of his 5 seasons. He was a primary starter in 2018, but tore his ACL in the season opener. But he came back and had a solid season as a team captain and received a Senior Bowl invite as well. The strengths of his game real quick. He's a decent athlete. His family has a couple former college basketball players in it. He has good anticipation and pass protection, mirrors his edge rushers effectively when he had to play tackle, because he was generally a tackle in college. And he was a good backside blocker. And he works to the second level effectively. The weaknesses of his game, though, is that he struggles with power rushers on the edge. Down blocks are an issue. Play strength is lacking. And he's not great technically right now. He's not good with hand use, and he allows defenders to win battles that they shouldn't be able to win. Overall, he's a pretty good athlete that moves relatively well in space, but his strength is lacking right now to consider him moving to guard. Depending on the team, at this point, I don't think he can take on interior defensive linemen one-on-one, but he could when he beefs up a bit. He reminds me of B.J. Finney when he was coming out. He's a potential project player that can add depth along the inside of the line. He should be a mid to late day 3 selection. I watched his games against Tulane in 2018 and North Carolina in 2019. Last, I have Calvin Throckmorton from Oregon, a 6'5" senior at 317 pounds. He started primarily as a right tackle in 2016 and 2019, but he also started games at right guard, center, and I believe at left guard as well. So he started everywhere along the offensive line too. He's another strong, tough, and smart football player. He has starting experience all across the interior of the offensive line, uses his strength and toughness to his advantage in a technically sound manner. He always drives his feet. He works up to the second level responsibly, and he has enough strength to move edge defenders on running plays. And he's adequate in pass protection, and he's aware of his physical limitations and doesn't try to overextend himself because, make no mistake about it, he is not a great athlete. He's lacking in overall athleticism. He's not going to be able to play tackle in the NFL. He's just not fast enough. He can't make reach blocks. He's not effective in zone blocking schemes, and he misses a lot of blocks in space. He just doesn't get out there fast enough. He's got tight knees and hips, and he stands too tall when he's firing out in the run game. And he has shorter arms, which makes it harder for his blocks to stick. So overall, Calvin Throckmorton has some decent tools to work with and is a good technician with starting experience all over the offensive line, but his athletic profile is pretty damaging, and damaging enough, in fact, to lock him in as an interior offensive lineman and likely a backup at that. He's got a high floor and a low ceiling, because of his technical skills and his lack of athleticism. I watched his games against Auburn and Colorado this past year. So when talking about how I'd rank these prospects, I went with Matt Hennessy first because I really liked his tape. The size concerns may push him down the boards, but there's some pretty good talent and great technique here. Second, I have Justin Herron, who's a good athlete, can add some strength and could become a good depth piece down the line. He reminds me a lot of B.J. Finney and Matt Filer when they came out. Calvin Throckmorton's next. He could be a decent backup along the interior, but I don't like how limited he is athletically. And last, I have Kyle Murphy. He just didn't dominate at the lower level of college, and that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be good at the NFL level for sure. I'm not all that interested. So that was offensive line, and now I'll talk a little bit about mock drafts. I'll run through Austin's real quick because he sent his official one to me. Obviously, the Steelers have 6 picks, and there's going to be no trades involved in this one. So Austin, with his picks, went with Justin Matabuke at interior defensive line, one of the guys he looked at pick number 49. He's one of those guys that I've seen connected to the Steelers before. Someone to replace Javon Hargrave. That would be good to see. Next, he has Tyler Biadasz from Wisconsin, the center from Wisconsin. He had a pretty good season this past year and was one of the best offensive lines the last 2 years, blocking for a guy that's also going to be considered in terms of being taken by the Steelers and Jonathan Taylor. So he's having a bolstering of the offensive line there. At 124, he's got the safety Brandon Jones, who is, where's he from? Texas, right? Yeah, that's right. From Texas. So going with another safety from Texas, the Steelers need some depth at the safety position right now. So that would be a worthwhile endeavor. At 135, he has Kenny Willekes from Michigan State, the edge defender. The Steelers don't seem to have faith in Ola Adeni right now or Tuzar Skipper, so that's why he's going there. He also has Javelin Guidry, I believe is how you say the name, the cornerback from, is that Utah? Yeah, that's right. So hopefully he'd be able to work out better as a 6th-round pick than our old buddy Brian Allen. And then last, he has offensive tackle Colton McKivitz from West Virginia, a guy that's most likely going to have to kick inside. Good demeanor, good in terms of starting experience, but not all that athletically gifted, so that's why he'll be available then. And then to run over my mock draft, in the 2nd round at pick 49, I have Michael Pittman Jr., the receiver from USC. He's been one of my favorite prospects throughout this process. I'm going to have a profile on him after the draft. I didn't get a chance to get to those earlier like I wanted to, but I will get those done. I think he could add a nice big receiver for the Steelers, and I think that he could be a helpful addition to this offense. In the 3rd round at 102, I have safety Kayvon Wallace from Clemson. I know the Steelers already invested 2 higher picks in a safety over the last few years, but I think you have to consider that Clemson players are going to be more likely to be taken by the Steelers this year because that's one of the schools that the Steelers actually got a chance to go see with a pro day. So I think that you have to consider those players as well. With the Steelers' first 4th-round pick at 124, I have them taking interior offensive lineman Shane Lemieux, who also played next to Calvin Throckmorton at times. I think that would be a decent option to bolster the offensive line like I had talked about earlier. With the 2nd, 4th-round pick at 135, I have the Steelers taking defensive tackle Leki Fotu, who is going to bolster the running game on defense and plug up the middle like a 2-gapping nose tackle, similar to Daniel McCullers, but will hopefully be better, obviously. 6th, I have Jacob Phillips, the linebacker from LSU that I looked at. Not overly great player, but should be at least a decent special teams player. And then last, I have A.J. Green, the cornerback from Oklahoma State. So with that, thank you for bearing with me with this really abbreviated podcast. I appreciate your support, and I wanted to thank Austin again for all his hard work. And I'm sorry that this whole process has been kind of messed up at times, and that I haven't been able to put more time into it. This is not how I wanted things to go necessarily, but we're in the middle of a lot of stuff right now, so this wasn't exactly people's choice anyways. So Continue to stay safe out there and enjoy the draft. Thank you so much for listening. Have a terrific day and enjoy the draft and stay safe.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.